This woman tried to have the perfect wedding, family, friends, and a loving boyfriend. All stood ready. But her dog had other plans. He kept pulling at her dress, sinking his teeth in without letting go. But when the bride found out what her dog was trying to warn her from, she bursted into tears. Dog tries to warn bride before wedding. When she realizes why, she bursts into tears. Elise and her dog Rufus had been together for what seemed like ages. She got her four-legged friend when she was still in high school and never spent a day without him since. The two of them did everything together. But a couple years after high school, things changed. Because shortly after Elise started college, she met Victor. He was the man of her dreams, and that meant that she had to divide her love and attention between two men now. But Rufus didn't seem to mind. He always was calm and collected. But just 1 week before their wedding, that all changed. It started when Elise tried on her wedding dress a week before the wedding. The dress was gorgeous and tailor-made for her. The silk fabric and pearl inlays really made her feel like a princess, and she just wanted that feeling one more time before her big day. So she put on the dress. The dress was on, and Elise felt great. As she looked at herself in the mirror, she turned around and spoke to her friend Rufus, who was also in the room. "What do you think about it, buddy?" But Rufus didn't respond with kindness. He grabbed hold of the dress with his teeth. Elise was startled by her dog's reaction and let out a panicked scream. She got angry with Rufus and demanded he let go, but by that time, the damage was already done. Rufus stepped backward with his tail between his legs, and the beautiful princess dress had added a nasty tear at the bottom. Elise climbed out of her dress and looked at the torn fabric with tears in her eyes. "Why, Rufus? Why have you done this?" she said while wiping a single tear from her eye. Of course, she knew that Rufus wasn't able to answer that question, but nonetheless, this dress had to be fixed. The next morning, after dropping off her dress at the clothing repair shop, Elise tried to focus on the future. Because today something fun was on the agenda. Elise set out to go horse riding, her favorite pastime activity, driving up to the ranch. She could already see the blonde steeds prancing around in the meadow. Rufus always came along on these horse riding days. He loved the wide open landscapes of the ranch. And more importantly, Rufus was great with horses. His calm and collective demeanor always put the ponies at ease. And you could clearly see the fun Rufus had when he was playing with them. But this time was different. This time, Rufus wasn't calm and collected at all. Rufus was acting erratically and totally out of character. Every time Elise tried to ride off with her horse, Rufus would block their path and start barking loudly, making it impossible for them to move forward. Elise eventually stepped off her horse when she realized Rufus wasn't going to let up. She didn't understand why Rufus would behave so intensely all of a sudden. But a relaxing day at the ranch was out of the question like this. Disappointed, she grabbed a hold of Rufus's collar and headed back home. Elise drove home, with Rufus happily wagging his tail in the back seat. The behavior of her dog had confused the young woman greatly. Why was he acting out like this? Did he experience a lack of exercise or something? What is it, Rufus? First the dress. And now, after a long walk with Rufus in the park, Elise was back home again. This time she hoped that all his odd tendencies were gone. But unfortunately for Elise, Rufus would strike again on the last night before her wedding. That night, Elise had a fun night with friends planned. The plan was to come together and have some drinks and snacks, just like the old days. It wasn't every day their best friend got married. So celebrating this joyous occasion on her last night as a single woman was something that just needed to happen. Elise prepared for hours to get everything ready beforehand. The doorbell rang and everything was ready for them in the living room. The soon-to-be bride walked up to the front door and greeted her friends with a broad smile on her face. "Come in, lovely people. Everything is ready. Let's have a fun night," he said, laughing. But then suddenly, bang! A loud noise was heard from within the living room, followed by the shattering sound of glass shards. What was that? Her friends all said together in unison, but Elise didn't have to guess. She knew exactly what had happened there, and also who was responsible for it all. Elise didn't say anything to her friends. Instead, she just instinctively turned around and rushed toward the living room, and there she found the havoc she was unfortunately already expecting. The coffee table with its complete drink setup was flipped over and now lay flat on the living room floor. The living room was one big mess, and Rufus was standing next to it, wagging his tail happily. Was that damn dog proud of what he had done? Elise thought she knew her dog Rufus through and through. But the last few days, Rufus was unrecognizable to her. What is going on? Disappointed in her friend, Elise picked up the pieces from the ground and tried to continue her friend's night. But Rufus kept interfering, demanding attention every time. Elise had enough and decided to bring Rufus to Victor, who was watching a movie in the upstairs bedroom. "Lock him in here, please," Elise begged her boyfriend. After the get-together had ended and Elise waved her last friend goodbye, she walked upstairs. Elise shared the story of his strange behavior with Victor, and he seemed confused as well. "And this isn't the first time this week. Should we hire a dog trainer? I'm getting totally stressed out." Elise said, sighing. Victor put his hand on Elise's shoulder to calm her down. "Maybe a nice warm bath is what you need at this point." Elise agreed and thanked her boyfriend for those calming words. She ran a bath and stepped into the water. But during her 30-minute bath, she kept hearing Rufus bark excessively. After her 30-minute bath, Elise walked over to her boyfriend. "Victor, first of all, thanks for the suggestion of taking a bath. But what was Rufus barking so loudly for?" Victor replied that he didn't know. Rufus was just standing in the middle of the living room barking upwards for no reason. But Rufus had a very good reason for all of his behavior. And on the day of the wedding, they would find out why. And that was this very day. Elise got out of bed well rested but nervous. She was looking forward to getting married to Victor, but she hoped everything would go smoothly today. She really wanted Rufus to attend the wedding. Like, he was a longtime best friend after all. But yeah, with all the weird stuff that happened over the last week, she desperately hoped that her dog would behave. Today has to be perfect, and I want you to help with that. She told Rufus. Rufus just looked at his owner with Sweetwater-filled eyes. It gave Elise confidence that he was going to behave, but the young bride had no idea what was waiting for her on this very day, because before the wedding even had the chance to start, Rufus had already ruined an all-important moment. Elise stepped out of her car and walked over to the venue where it all took place. It was a beautiful mansion with rose gardens all around. The weather forecast was great, and Rufus was behaving like a true gentleman, walking beside her with calm and collective strides. But that was all about to change, because right before entering the venue, something terrible happened. Rufus's calm steps started to quicken, and he moved around frantically right before entering the building. Then the silence was broken with loud barking. And before Elise knew it, Rufus had already pressed his teeth into her dress again, pulling hard at the seam. The dress was fixed just before the wedding day arrived, and Elise was very happy with the work her tailor had done, but it was all for nothing, because almost at the exact same spot, Rufus had managed to create a new tear. Elise was furious and shouted for Rufus to go away. Elise looked at her dress-in and started weeping. "I can't get married like this," she whispered to herself. She went inside and rushed to her dressing room as quickly as possible. She needed to get this fixed, but didn't see how she could do that in such a short amount of time. Arriving at the dressing room, Elise was surprised to see her aunt already sitting there. The older woman wanted to surprise her niece by doing her hair and makeup for this special day, but instead of a happy bride, the woman saw crying Elise walk into the dressing room. "What's up, girl?" she said. Elise explained all of Rufus's wrongdoings over the last week and showed her aunt the tear in her dress. Luckily for Elise, her aunt was the rock she needed at this point. The older woman pulled Elise toward her and said that everything would be fine. "We can fix this together." Elise nodded nervously in reply. Elise's aunt invited her niece to sit down, and she followed it up with an odd but welcome suggestion. "You know what really helps me when I'm feeling stressed out? A nice sip of bourbon, just something to take the edge off." Yeah, she reached inside her bag and got out a small bottle. She grabbed a small glass from the cabinet and placed it on the table in front of Elise. A gentle pour was made, and Elise picked up the glass to take a tiny sip. But right before Elise was able to take a sip of bourbon, a noise was heard from outside the doorway. The sound intensified, and seconds later, they saw Rufus rush into the room. "Not again," Elise thought as she saw her dog move around wildly. Rufus sat down in front of Elise and started barking loudly. She reached out with her spare hand and tried to calm her dog down, but then Elise was unable to calm down Rufus, no matter what she tried. Rufus just kept barking at her and filled up the room with his intense energy. "What is it?" Elise shouted before taking a sip, but right before the glass touched Elise's lips, Rufus jumped up and knocked the glass out of her hands. The glass fell on the ground, spilling the bourbon all over the floor. "This was just like last week when he ruined my friend's night," Elise explained to her aunt. "Why would you do such a thing, Rufus?" Elise shouted, but then she looked at her aunt, who seemed puzzled. Can it be? Elise heard this remark and asked her aunt what she meant by that. Her aunt remained quiet for a while, but when she started talking, she said something shocking. She explained that she recognized this behavior herself. Her own dog acted the exact same way when she got pregnant years ago. Elise was in total shock after hearing those words. "Pregnant? How do you mean?" she replied in total confusion. Could this really be the reason she couldn't be pregnant, right? She just couldn't be. The young bride felt tears well up in her eyes as she looked at her trusted friend. Elise's aunt asked Elise to stay put. She would go out and get a pregnancy test as soon as possible. That way they would know for sure. I'll be back in 10 minutes tops. Don't move, and especially don't drink the bourbon, she said, awkwardly smiling. This situation got bizarre quickly. Her aunt wasn't lying because in exactly 10 minutes' time, she was back in the room. There was a drugstore close by, and they luckily sold some pregnancy tests. Elise went to the bathroom and peed on the blue stick. And to her surprise, the device showed a plus sign. It was positive. Elise was speechless. She and Victor really wanted a baby together and had been trying for some time. But after multiple failed attempts, they decided to put it on hold for a while, but somehow it just happened this time. But how could Rufus have known this? He asked her aunt. Her aunt told Elise that her dog noticed it too, way before she realized she was pregnant. Dogs have an instinctive sense for these things. Her aunt asked Elise to sum up all the strange moments of the last week so they could make sense of them together. And then it all became clear. Elise started talking and started out with the torn dress earlier in the week. Then she recalled the horseback riding, followed up by the food and drinks night and the bathtub incident. All weird moments that didn't make sense individually, but after hearing them all together, her aunt started smiling understandingly. Elise's aunt explained that horse riding is something that is usually off limits while pregnant, and scented bath oils are also known to be harmful to an unborn child when it's developing. And of course, everyone knows that you should not drink alcohol while having a child growing inside your belly. Rufus was probably already sensing the fact that you were having a child, and in your case, he was simply protecting your future baby. It's a miraculous thing, the instinct of dogs, and when there is a bond as strong as yours, there is nothing that is impossible. Elise's aunt said, smiling. Lussace burst into tears after her aunt was finished explaining the entire thing. She was going to have a baby. This was a miracle. And Rufus wasn't being an annoying dog at all. He was just protecting the miracle that was growing inside my belly. The future mom looked at her dog and smiled gently. Like Elise leapt forward toward her four-legged best friend. She got at eye level with him and gave him the biggest hug. I'm so sorry that I got angry with you, buddy. You were just protecting me and my child all this time. Their friendship was rekindled, but Elise needed to do one more thing. At that moment, Elise decided to break the most important rule in getting married. She was going to visit her fiancé before the ceremony. Normally, that was prohibited, but he deserved to hear this joyful news as soon as possible. Together with Rufus, she ran through the hallways of the mansion. Victor couldn't believe it and was just as emotional as his soon-to-be wife. They hugged Rufus together and went into the wedding ceremony with an extra happy chip on their shoulder. During the toast, they broke the news to family and friends, and they didn't forget to include the amazing acts of their dog. This is a turbulent week, but it all was worth it in the end. Elise and Victor were married, and they had an extra appreciation for their four-legged best friend, and Rufus was happy too because he would soon welcome his new brother or sister. What a way to start their lives together.